In medieval times, nobody handed you a house. You built it yourself or slept in the cold. No fancy tools, no hired help, just daily work and a bit of hope. It wasn't fast, easy, or pretty. But medieval peasants got it done. Here's what building from scratch really meant back then. Finding the perfect spot for your medieval dream home wasn't exactly like scrolling through Zillow. For starters, peasants rarely owned the land they lived on. About 95% of all land in medieval Europe belonged to either wealthy lords or the church, leaving peasants to build with permission or sometimes just hoping nobody important would notice. The lords weren't exactly dropping by with housewarming gifts either, more like dropping by for rent collection. Peasants had to be strategic when choosing their home sites. Forest edges offered building materials and firewood right next door, while spots near streams provided water for drinking, cooking, and that once-a-year bath everyone talked about. Some brave souls practiced assarting, clearing patches of forest to create new farmland and building space. This was technically illegal in many places and could result in hefty fines if caught. But if the local lord saw you improving his land, he might just let you stay and pay taxes on it instead. Unlike today, there were no complicated zoning laws or building permits. The main concerns were much more practical. Would the ground flood when it rained? Could you find enough flat space? Were there too many bugs? One strange fact is that some medieval villages actually moved locations entirely over centuries, not because of planning, but because peasants gradually rebuilt their homes closer to better resources. The perfect medieval building site needed three key things: access to water, nearby timber and ground that wouldn't turn into a swamp at the first sign of rain. If you found all three, you'd call it home faster than you could say feudal obligations. Of course, picking your spot was just the beginning. You couldn't exactly order pre-cut lumber from the local hardware store. The medieval version of free shipping was literally you shipping your own back as you hauled logs home. Most peasant homes were small, usually just one room about 15 by 20 ft, but that didn't make gathering materials any easier. With your spot selected and marked out with stakes, the real work was about to begin. A good location might save your life in winter, but it wouldn't keep the rain off your head or the wolves from your door. For that, you needed something more substantial than just a promising patch of dirt. Medieval forests served as the hardware stores of their time. But getting timber wasn't as simple as grabbing a shopping cart. Wood was the most essential building material for peasant homes, yet its collection came with challenges that would make modern DIY enthusiasts quit on day one. Access to forests was strictly controlled. While peasants could usually gather dead wood for fires, cutting live trees often required permission from the local lord. Many medieval forests had specific rules called forest laws that determined who could take what. Breaking these rules could result in fines or worse. Records from 13th century England show some unfortunate souls lost hands for timber theft. The tools for wood collection were painfully basic. Most peasants owned an axe, a prized possession passed through generations. For splitting logs, they used iron or wooden wedges hammered with mallets. No power tools here, just power struggles with stubborn tree trunks. Timing mattered tremendously. Greenwood, freshly cut, bent easier for curved pieces, but would shrink and crack as it dried. Drywood was more stable, but harder to work with. The smartest builders cut wood in winter when sap was low, then let it season for months before building. Different parts of the house required different types of wood. Oak was preferred for main support posts due to its strength. Some medieval oak frames still stand today over 500 years later. For the bendy parts needed for walls, peasants sought hazel, willow, or young ash saplings that could be woven between posts. Transportation presented another headache. Logs were heavy, and medieval roads were basically mud tracks that turned into soup during rain. Getting wood home was the original drag-and-drop interface, literally dragging logs through mud until you dropped from exhaustion. Most building sites were limited to using trees within a mile or two. The forest was also home to wolves, bears, and bandits, making lumber collection the original extreme sport. Many went in groups, turning timber harvesting into social events, where strength in numbers provided both safety and extra hands for the heavy lifting. After weeks of gathering, splitting, and dragging, a pile of timber would finally appear at the building site. With materials collected and the seasons carefully considered, It was time to put all that hard-earned wood to good use. The community would soon gather for the next crucial step in bringing shelter to life. A few months ago, I had no idea what a health ring even was until my fiancé got me one, and I have to say, I'm shocked this isn't a widely known and used product. It tracks my stress levels, and what I found out is that some supplements made my stress score spike, while others actually helped bring it down. I adjusted a few things based on that, and honestly, I feel 10 years younger. My wife mainly uses it to track her menstrual cycles, and she is obsessed with her sleep quality score. I noticed they are currently running a limited 69% discount, but I don't know how long it will last. It's currently only $60, and it's clear this one is the best bang for your buck, with other health rings priced around $350 with less functions. They managed to price it this low because they cut out the middleman, like Amazon, Walmart, etc., who drive up the price and take a big margin, ending up with the customer paying 3 to 5 times more. If you are on TV, you can check it out yourself by pausing the video and scanning the QR code with your phone camera, or clicking the first link in the description of this video. When it came time to raise the timber frame, medieval peasants turned house building into the original community event. Medieval home construction was always a group effort. The timber frame formed the skeleton of the house and had to be assembled first. Getting started meant digging holes, deep ones. Main support posts needed to be sunk at least 2 ft into the ground for stability. These holes were dug using simple wooden shovels or iron spades for the lucky few who own metal tools. Many medieval house posts were set on large stones at the bottom of these holes, creating natural drainage and preventing rot. Once holes were ready, the raising began. 4 to 6 strong adults would lift each major post while someone else guided it into position. This was not the time to show off your independence. Try raising a 20 ft oak beam alone, and you'd quickly become the village pancake. Joints were the true marvel of medieval engineering. Without metal fasteners, builders relied on woodworking techniques like mortise and tenon joints. These were wooden puzzle pieces that fit together perfectly. A rectangular hole cut into one beam and a matching tongue carved into another. When assembled correctly, these joints could hold firm for centuries without nails. Wooden pegs driven through overlapping beams secured everything together. These pegs were called tree nails and were typically made from dried hardwood like oak or maple. They swelled when wet, creating an even tighter fit during rainy weather. The main event was raising the roof beams. This required careful coordination as heavy timbers were lifted into position by as many as 10 people using ropes and poles. Records from medieval building projects suggest that accidents were common. One account mentions 3 men injured when a roof beam slipped. Teamwork wasn't optional. It was survival. Village communities developed unwritten rules about helping with house raising. If you refuse to help your neighbor build their home, don't expect anyone to show up when yours needs repair. With the frame standing tall and secured, the structure finally began to take shape. But a house of only beams wouldn't keep anyone dry for long. Now came the task of filling those empty spaces between the timbers with something that could turn a skeleton into a home. With the timber frame standing strong, medieval builders faced their next challenge, filling in the walls. Enter wattle and daub, the medieval world's answer to drywall, except much messier and surprisingly effective. This building technique was so common that over 90% of medieval peasant homes used it for their walls. The process began with wattling, weaving flexible sticks between the upright timber posts. Workers used thin branches from hazel, willow, or other bendable woods, creating a lattice pattern that resembled a giant basket. This woven framework provided the structure for the dog. What exactly was due? A sticky mixture that combined clay, soil, sand, and straw, plus one special ingredient. Animal manure was the secret adhesive that held medieval homes together. Nothing says welcome home quite like walls made partially from cow poop. The science behind this unusual mixture was surprisingly sound. Clay provided the body, sand prevented cracking, straw added strength, and animal dung contained natural binding agents. Medieval builders might not have understood chemistry, but they definitely knew their crap. Making do was a hands-on family affair. Everyone participated in mixing the ingredients in a pit by stomping it with bare feet until it reached the right consistency. Children often joined this mud-stomping party, turning messy work into play. Application required skill developed through generations. Workers slapped handfuls of dew onto both sides of the wattle framework, simultaneously pressing it through the gaps until the two sides joined in the middle. They smoothed the surface using wooden floats or simply their hands. Drying took patience. A newly dubbed wall needed weeks to harden properly, and weather could complicate the process. Once dry, the walls received a protective coating of lime-white wash if the family could afford it. This bright white finish sealed the dog, deterred insects, and reflected precious light into the dim interior. The completed wattle and dog walls provided decent insulation against cold and were surprisingly durable when maintained. Archaeological evidence shows some medieval wattle and dog sections lasted hundreds of years. Not bad for walls made partially from dirt and dung. Proof that sometimes the crappiest materials make the most solid homes. With walls now enclosing the space, protection from wind and rain was nearly complete. But what about keeping the family dry from above? Look up at most medieval peasant houses and you'd see thatch, nature's roofing solution that combined readily available materials with surprising effectiveness. Thatched roofs were the standard covering for peasant homes across medieval Europe, with straw, reeds and grasses serving as the primary building materials. The creation of a thatch roof required significant skill. Professional thatchers were highly respected craftsmen in medieval communities, one of the few specialized building trades accessible to peasants. The process began with gathering massive amounts of dried plant material. Wheat straw was most common in farming areas, while water reeds provided superior durability near marshlands and rivers. The thatching technique involved layering bundles of material from the bottom edge of the roof upward. Each bundle was secured to the wooden roof structure, using split hazel branches called sways that were bent over the thatch and tied to the rafters. The thatcher worked upward, overlapping each new layer to shed water efficiently. When finished properly, these roofs were remarkably waterproof and insulating. The steep pitch, usually around 45 to 60 degrees, allowed rainwater to run off quickly rather than seeping through. The angle was crucial. Too shallow and water would soak through. Too steep, and thatcher might slide off and discover the hard way that medieval healthcare plans were non-existent. Thatch thickness typically reached 12 to 15 in, creating excellent insulation. This kept homes warmer in winter and cooler in summer than you might expect. But thatch had serious drawbacks. Fire risk topped the list. A single spark from the central hearth could ignite the dried material. Many medieval towns eventually banned thatch after devastating fires wiped out entire neighborhoods. Archaeological evidence suggests fire was a constant concern with charred timbers found in roughly 1 out of 5 excavated medieval houses. The roof also served as luxury housing for uninvited guests. Mice, birds, insects, and even snakes moved into the warm, dry thatch. Medieval peasants didn't need an alarm clock. Just wait for the birds nesting above to announce morning with enthusiastic chirping directly overhead. Most thatch roofs needed replacement every 15 to 25 years, though well-maintained water reed thatch could last 50 to 60 years in ideal conditions. The old thatch wasn't wasted. It was recycled as garden mulch or animal bedding, with walls to block the wind and a roof to shed the rain. The house was now enclosed, but what about life inside? Now that the house had walls and a roof, medieval peasants faced the challenge of making the interior livable. The first priority, floors. Unlike our modern homes with their polished surfaces, medieval floors started as plain dirt. The same soil you walked on outside continued right into your home, just packed down by countless footsteps. To improve these earthen floors, peasants would mix in straw, crushed shells, sand or stone chips, then tamp it down until it became nearly as hard as concrete. In fancier homes, they might add a thin layer of lime on top. These floors typically sloped to one side, allowing liquids to drain toward a corner and outside. Wall treatments were medieval minimalism at its finest, mostly because there weren't any. The interior sides of wattle and dog walls might get a coat of lime wash if the family could afford it, but often they remained the natural mud color. Furniture was sparse and purely functional. Wooden benches that doubled as sleeping platforms lined the walls. Tables were simple boards on trestles, that could be taken down when not in use. If IKEA had existed in medieval times, their instruction manuals would have been a single page with just the word luck. Storage solutions were creative by necessity. Most belongings hung from pegs on walls or roof beams. Baskets stored smaller items, while clay-lined pits and floor corners kept root vegetables cool. Space was tight. An average peasant house measured roughly 15 by 20 ft, yet needed to accommodate an entire family of 5 to 8 people, plus animals, during winter. Chickens, goats, and other small livestock provided essential body heat during freezing weather. Nothing says cozy family bonding like sharing your bedroom with a goat. Privacy was basically non-existent. The entire family slept in one room with parents and children all piled onto raised sleeping platforms. Light came from the open door during the day and from the central fire at night. Despite the cramped quarters, these homes functioned remarkably well. But the true heart of any medieval home wasn't the walls or the floor. Fire provided the beating heart of every medieval house. Yet managing it presented a dangerous puzzle. Unlike modern homes with their furnaces and neat chimneys, early medieval houses featured open hearths, simple fire pits located right in the middle of the living space. The central location wasn't a design choice, but a necessity. It allowed heat to reach all corners of the one-room home. Most peasant dwellings lacked proper chimneys before the 14th century. Instead, they relied on a hole in the roof called a smoke loo, or small vents in the walls. Smoke simply rose until it found its way out, drifting through the thatch or walls on its own meandering journey. Basically a medieval version of, "I'll find my own way home, thanks." Many hearths were simply shallow depressions in the dirt floor lined with stones or clay. More advanced versions might be raised slightly on a platform of packed earth to reduce fire risk. Families often spent entire days gathering fuel, wood, dried peat, straw, animal dung, or even seaweed in coastal areas just to keep warm through winter. Without chimneys, smoke became an unavoidable roommate. Medieval homes were perpetually hazy environments where ceiling beams gradually turned black from soot. People developed a tolerance, but visitors often complained of stinging eyes and difficulty breathing. Cooking occurred directly over or beside the open flame. Cauldrons hung from tripods, while bread baked in covered clay pots buried in hot ashes. The hearth was basically a medieval entertainment center, restaurant and heating system all in one. The original 3-in-1 deal. The constant fire hazard can't be overstated. With wooden frames, thatch roofs, and open flames, medieval villages regularly suffered devastating fires. Records from 12th century England note at least 8 villages that completely burned down and had to be rebuilt. While the hearth provided essential heat, it also created ongoing problems. But keeping a medieval home standing wasn't just about managing fire. It meant a constant battle against weather, time, and the inevitable forces that threatened to bring your humble abode crashing down around you. Maintaining a medieval house wasn't a weekend hobby. It was a constant fight against nature. These humble homes required endless upkeep and presented challenges that would make modern homeowners run screaming to their insurance agents. Unlike today, where we might call a contractor, medieval peasants had to master every repair technique themselves. Weather ruined walls, roofs, floors. Repairs were non-stop. Spring meant roof patching, fall meant mudding, winter meant freezing. The endless maintenance cycle of a medieval house might explain why peasants never developed hobbies like scrapbooking. Who has time for crafts when your wall is turning back into mud? Thatch repairs topped the maintenance list. Rodents dug tunnels through the material, birds pulled out nesting material, and storms tore away chunks. Locals developed sayings about different plants' durability. Reed thatch will outlast the tenant. Straw thatch will ask when the new tenant is coming. Walls required constant attention too. Wattle and daub cracked in dry weather and dissolved in wet seasons. Clever peasants whitewashed their walls regularly, as the lime coating provided an early warning system. When white turned brown, it was time to repair before water reached the wall structure. Medieval home maintenance, where white walls turning brown, was either a repair signal or evidence your chimneyless house was slowly smoking everyone inside. Floor maintenance involved adding fresh layers of clay or packed earth to level depressions. In wetter areas, some homeowners scattered herbs like meadowsweet underfoot to mask the inevitable dampness smell. Tools for repairs were absurdly simple by today's standards. A wooden float for smoothing dew, a bone knife for trimming thatch, and a mallet for hammering and replacement wattles made up the typical repair kit. Their version of read the instructions was, ask Grandpa before he dies. Evidence from excavated house sites suggests most peasant homes underwent multiple major repairs during their lifetimes, with some completely rebuilt on the same footprint every 30 to 40 years. Despite all these challenges, these homes weren't just shelters. They were busy centers of family life, where medieval families worked, ate, slept, and lived together in extraordinarily close quarters. Family life in a medieval peasant home redefined the meaning of quality time. Imagine 5 to 10 people sharing a single room, no bigger than a modern bedroom. Medieval census records show the average rural family included parents, 3 to 6 children, and often a grandparent or two. All these humans occupied a space typically measuring just 15 by 20 feet. Add a few chickens and maybe a goat during winter, and you had a medieval version of extreme close quarters. Privacy, the concept barely existed. Everyone slept in the same space with the entire family, often sharing a raised sleeping platform filled with straw or hay. Beds were essentially shelves attached to walls, which meant medieval children never experienced the joy of being told, "Go to your room." During a tantrum, daily activities required careful coordination. The home doubled as a workshop, kitchen, dining room, bedroom, and sometimes barn. Morning typically began at dawn when daylight filtered through the open door or small shuttered windows. These windows rarely had glass. Instead, they might be covered with oiled cloth or parchment that let in some light while keeping out the worst of the weather. Bathing happened infrequently and typically outside the home. Medieval people weren't necessarily filthy as often portrayed, but they certainly had different standards than we do today. Most peasants washed hands and face daily, using water collected from nearby streams or wells, but full-body bathing might only happen a few times a year, usually in summer. Meals brought everyone together around the central hearth. Families ate from wooden bowls or trenchers, stale bread slices used as plates, and most people carried their own personal knife for cutting food. Few other utensils were used. Fingers were the original forks. The day's main meal typically came at midday with lighter food in morning and evening. Evenings were busy with essential tasks. While daylight lasted, repairs and maintenance kept everyone working. After dark, the fire provided just enough light for tasks like spinning, sewing, or carving wooden implements. Stories and conversation were the Netflix of medieval times, except buffering occurred when Grandpa fell asleep mid-tale. Winter forced even closer quarters. When temperatures dropped, the family huddled near the central fire, and whatever space remained, often filled with livestock, brought inside for warmth. One medieval poem describes a family of 8 sharing their home with 2 cows, a calf, and 6 hens during a particularly harsh January. Despite the cramped conditions, lack of privacy, constant repairs, and persistent smoke, these humble houses sheltered countless generations through centuries of medieval life. The homes themselves were impressive technical achievements built entirely from local materials using methods passed down through generations. Even more impressive were the people who managed to create families, community, and meaning within their cramped, smoky walls.